Thank you, thank you. We have a million questions and too few minutes, so fasten your seatbelts. We're off. We're going to do this more or less in conversational style. Ruth Ann Fuller works as a consultant and strategic planner. She's been an alderman, now councilor, for a decade. Scott Lennon has been a budget manager.
I'll correct her, 8 years. Let's make sure that we get the facts right, sorry.
Oh, okay. Scott Lennon has been a budget manager for the State Auditor's Office and recently for the Middlesex County Sheriff's Office. He's been on the City Council for 16 years and has been its president since 2009. Did I get that right, Scott?
Sure.
Okay, good. Keep all your answers that short. It'll be terrific.
No problem.
Okay. Everyone talks about smart growth. Most people talk about smart growth as it relates to the village centers. But I wonder, how do you balance preserving what has been so special about Newton, you remember Newton, the Garden City, with its perceived needs for expansion? And why don't we start with Scott?
Thank you, Marjorie. I appreciate you being here this afternoon. We're off and running, so I just want to make sure you say hello, and thank you for everybody to being here. That balance needs to come in by proactive planning. That is something that we are not doing here in the city, and even the little that we're not doing it successfully. We need to bring people to the table. Residents of areas, businesses of areas, developers, petitioners, we all need to be at the table proactively planning. And we need to do it not around a project. We need to do it outside of a project setting and bring people together. And one thing I would like to do as mayor is to put together a development strategy and bring all those folks to the table, a more educational plan on what we're doing around development. I think that is vitally important. I've been walking the villages, I've been walking neighborhoods now for almost a year and listening to folks very carefully, and there is frustration out there. So as mayor, I want to ensure that we're setting a vision and that we are proactively planning, bringing residents to the table in those particular areas, making sure that we are planning properly for our city.
Thanks, Scott. Ruth Ann?
Great to be here. Thank you for all coming out on such a beautiful day to be inside with us. So change is already happening. It's not like we're trying to preserve something. What we want to do is take charge of that change and make it the change we want. Involves a couple of things. First of all, do you know we have no master plans for any of our villages or our commercial corridors? Let's come together, get genuine input from neighbors, from stakeholders, and create those master plans. Right now, we're always back on our heels when a developer comes up with their vision for an individual project. Then you have to switch your zoning to match your vision for what you want to happen in a village. And remember, each village is unique, so there isn't a one-size-fits-all. You have to do them one by one with genuine input.
Okay, let me ask you then, what do you hope to see come out of the zoning reform process that would bear on this whole tug of values? It doesn't matter. We're going to do this conversationally.
Right.
You mentioned zoning. Why don't you go ahead?
We've got two different parts to look at here. First, with zoning, what's happening out in our residential neighborhoods? The zoning right now is arcane. It's based on a calendar year, 1953, about when your lot was created. If your lot was created before 1953, if a house is demolished and a new one's put up, the setback from the sides is only 7.5 feet. If it was after 1953, it's 15 feet. That makes no sense. With all deliberate speed, I think this is a crisis. We have to fix our zoning so that if a house comes down, the new one fits in with the rest of the block.
Scott?
I would agree with that. I think I'll take it from both the village center and the residential character Margie, I think that's important. The village centers need to be destination areas, not pass-throughs. Getting in your car, driving there, parking, having a village center that you then have to get back in the car to go to another part of the village center to move to, that's creating congestion, that's creating problems. I also feel very strongly about our zoning redesign to look at our residential neighborhoods in a context base. Ohio Avenue, perfect example, when out knocking doors, looking at a very small Cape House with two big, huge multi-residences on each side. I went to the one in the middle to talk to that individual. They want to have resident-based planning, working with us, working with the city, respecting that residential character of our neighborhoods. That's where I believe the zoning redesign needs to end up.
Okay, let me just take this one step further. How do you balance this McMansionization against the interest of homeowners selling their homes? And there have even been suggestions that you should ban certain, sales to developers and so forth, when so many people have all of their assets tied up in their homes. Ruth
I
Ann.
wouldn't support, there was a proposal for a moratorium, say, Margie, a while back, which is something that I didn't support just for that very fact. Many people, that's their life investment. That's what they have there. I thought that that was somewhat of a very drastic idea, understanding that there are a lot of pieces to a puzzle by doing that. That being said, though, the proactive planning, being predictable throughout our city, residential, villages, businesses, is something that I believe this city is clamoring for.
Do you have anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. First of all, when we do the new zoning, we need to make sure that we are hearing from all of you, the residents, so that the new zoning pattern book matches what you want. That genuine input really matters. I am very aware that for our family certainly, and I think for almost everybody in Newton, our home is literally our nest egg. It's our most it's what we've invested in, so it does matter. And protecting our homeowners matters. I was completely against, there was the idea of not allowing anyone to demolish, anybody who bought a house here to demolish a house for a year. I was completely against that. But having predictable, sensible zoning ordinances will make sense for all of us.
Okay, let me move this slightly. Everybody agrees that we need more affordable housing. We don't need to get into accessory apartments because the council has already done that. But what should the goal of the city be for affordable housing, both in terms of the number of units that you think need to be built and what you think defines affordable housing in terms of cost and income eligibility? And we need to compress our answers. Scott.
Well, in terms of affordable housing, it's one of the top priorities that I will be looking at as mayor, because I believe having those affordable options throughout our city ensures that our city remains a diverse community. I grew up here in Newton. I've lived here all my life. Third generation Newtonian, 4 generations of my family will go to the Newton Public Schools. We are proud of the diversity and one of the most diverse communities that I grew up in. So by ensuring that we have affordable options throughout our city is vitally important to me. And I believe that as a community that we need to continue to look at ways in which to do that. Again, proactively bringing people to the table to understand the need for affordable housing, but it cannot be done around a specific project. That's what ends up happening. We go like this as a community. Outside of that, bringing people to the table outside of a project to figure out how to best create it and have the city ensure that we are investing our money in it as well.
I didn't hear any numbers in terms of income and cost of units and that kind of thing.
I'm sorry, do you mean in terms of?
what are you looking at in terms of affordable housing in Newton? Does that mean, a $500,000 instead of a $1 million house?
It's all based on, the HUD regulations and the area median income. It's hard, but we need to have low to moderate, and I also believe we need to have workforce housing to allow police, fire, teachers, municipal workers who work in our community. They need to be able, an opportunity to be afforded to live in their community.
Okay, Ruth Ann?
The data backs up what all of us are feeling here. We are losing the affordability. Do you know the median sales price right now is $1.1 million for a home here? Do you know what household income it takes to be able to afford that? $200,000. So for 70% of us who live here in the city, we wouldn't be able to buy in anymore. Our children can't, and for those who are seniors and on fixed incomes, trying to stay here is so difficult. Affordability and affordable housing really matters, and you need it for different types of people. We want working families to be able to move in here. The people who are the waiters and waitresses in our restaurants, that as well as the teachers and the firefighters and the police officers. So Marjorie, we need a range of housing affordability, from those who are low income to those who are workforce housing, but we need to go one step further. The middle class here in Newton is also stretching so hard to stay here. So it's affordability in so many ways.
I have to cut you off. All
No
right,
problem.
now I've heard you both say that you'd study the issue of raising taxes. So secretly, what's your sense of the tax burden in Newton? Is it too high, or should we be paying more? Just between us. Just between us. And what policies would you propose to increase the resources available to meet the city's budgetary needs? And would that include pilot programs, for example? I got a lot in the question.
Pilots, one of the things I'm out talking about here in the city is using my financial management experience to manage our budget on a day-to-day basis. It's something I do every day, something I will continue to look at. But moving forward, I am not going to continuously try to provide city services constantly on the backs of the taxpayers. We need to find ways to generate revenue here in our city. And as you mentioned, Margie, one of the ways is to go back and look at our pilot, the payments in lieu of taxes that we are getting here in the city. I think in our last budget, the number was somewhere like $260,000. We need to get more aggressive. We need to develop a program in which to be able to do this. And I'm not saying that we have to develop one standard program, because you have a variety of different nonprofits here that may not be able to afford the same thing. I want to start with institutions of higher education and dedicate maybe some of those those payments towards our educational system. So there is some synergy.
We just got the stop sign. Ruth Ann?
Remember 2007 and the beginning of 2008, when the markets were crashing around us and we had the whole financial crisis? At that point, I was appointed to be vice chair of the Citizen Advisory Group because we were facing a structural deficit here in Newton. We came up with a whole series of recommendations about operational efficiencies, revenue growth, and a way to balance our budget. So even before being elected to be on the Board of Aldermen, I had already shown leadership, and SETI Warren has used our recommendations to making us a financially stable city. Pilots. You will hear people talk about payments in lieu of taxes. The reason why they're so small is because we get stiff-armed by the nonprofits. There are a lot of cities and towns who are demanding increases in pilots. Don't hold your breath.
Okay.
Instead, look for services in lieu of taxes. We should be looking at BC and Newton Wellesley for pilots, not pilots.
While we talk about the income and the outflow, could you take a few seconds to address the unfunded pension liability and the projected OPEB? other post-employment benefits. Did I get that right? And, $719 million unfunded. The mayor has a plan to fully fund pensions and by 2029, and supposedly that plan is going forward, but what additionally needs to be done so that we're not weighed down? Ruth Ann, you want to start?
So in 2014, no one was paying attention to our pension and retiree health care benefits, neither on the city council nor in the mayor's office. So what did I do? I got a group of residents together, at all experts, no surprise here in Newton, and I authored the 80-page white paper that explained, it's more than you think, Marjorie. It's up over $1 billion, and I just saw the new numbers for retiree benefits. It just went up $49 million. That's about to be announced soon. That should be a breathtaking number to each of you in the office, in the audience. This is a serious financial challenge. Yes, Seti Warren has a plan. It's not going to be good enough. It grows retiree benefits from 10% of the budget to 20% of the budget in the next 12 years. That plan has to be rethought, and I have the financial expertise to do just that.
Just a couple things, Margie. So back to pilots for 1 second. The pilots can be done, okay? Massachusetts, University of Lowell, UMass Lowell and Lowell just came to an agreement recently, an $8 million package. I haven't been able to see the finite points of that, but it can be done. So let's be clear about that. So secondly, yes, Councilor Fuller did put together a plan with regard to the OPEB, and I've had a chance to review that, but there was no recommendation in that plan. It gave you what the problem was, but the recommendation was to solve it through a multi-prong approach that is not in there. There is a plan to address our pensions and our OPEB. It is crucial that we address the pension expense first. It's actually been extended out to the year 2030 to be able to do that. But we will do that 10 years ahead of schedule and shift that appropriation over to address that OPEB. This has been looked at by the city. It's been developed by the city. There is no other plan out there. I believe this plan can work. It has been looked at by our bond rating agencies, and they have increased our financial management guidelines from strong to very strong by looking at our overall plan.
Okay, we're going to jump around here a little bit. Would each one of you like to ask a question of the other? Do you want, just for a little variety?
Sure. So,
Sure.
Ruth Ann, what are you doing tonight after?
Yeah, and I was going to say, how's Jenna? Tell me about Jenna.
We
spend a lot of time together.
And I'll just say, this morning
Yeah.
we were together, and I said, good thing we didn't do opening and closing statements, because we can do each other's right now without a problem.
We're trying to
Okay.
avoid that.
You should know that I think I can speak for both of us. We both have great affection and respect for each other, so.
All right,
this is
okay,
a-
we're not,
this
then
is-
let's forget
So-
about,
You know.
let's forget about that. Let's jump to the Charter Commission. If voters on November 7th reject the Charter Commission proposal on the ballot, would you sign or not sign an alternative home rule petition providing 8 councilors elected by ward only and 8 elected citywide? Signing that, of course, would move it on to the state legislature and then to the governor for approval.
I would sign it with the understanding that I would want an opportunity to also sit with if I'm elected, sit with the council to talk about what that plan is. I'm in support of the charter recommendations. I am someone who has said that I believe that having the reduction of 24 to 12 and having it be at large holds accountable all the councilors here in this city. I think that that is important as we talk about these big issues of development and housing and zoning. We need to keep everyone accountable. and that's the reason why I'm supporting this. I do believe, as someone who has spent 16 years on the council, 10 years as a ward councilor, 6 years as an at-large councilor, I do understand the value of local representation. And I am hoping that as mayor, whether this passes or doesn't pass, you're going to get someone who really understands what the city is looking for, as someone who's helped facilitate the council. I will work closely, if this passes, very closely with area councils and other local representation to ensure everyone's voices are heard here in the city.
Ruth Ann, would you sign or not sign?
Here's what I'd like to do. I would like to work with all of you, both the yes and the no voters, to look at a different alternative than the 8+8. Let's look at 8+4, where the 4 are double wards, direct representation from those double wards. Right now, we've got, I think, a good balance between 2/3 elected at large, 1/3 ward only. Shifting over to that 8+8 when you've got 50% ward only, I don't think is right for the city. I too, like Scott, am a yes on the charter on the charter proposal. I think having all of us vote for all 12 is a terrific form of democracy. I think shrinking to 12 does make us more effective. So I think that ward representation from double wards would be a better proposal. So 8+4, a different proposal.
Okay, I have another charter question for you that hasn't really gotten a lot of discussion throughout this whole campaign. The proposed charter would limit the number of times city councilors may run for office. Now, some would argue that this provision establishes a new qualification for public office, which is inconsistent with the Massachusetts Constitution. And the Constitution provides that anyone who is over age 18 and a registered voter may run for public office. Now, this has not, we have the school committee that has term limits. It hasn't been adjudicated, no one has challenged it, but I wonder, even absent adjudication, philosophically, isn't it desirable to open opportunity to run? Is it wise to prevent people from running again in order to give voters maximum choice? Both of you are long-term counselors. Shouldn't voters have the opportunity to elect you again, no matter how long you've been
I'll
on
just
there?
say, Margie, that again, as someone who is supporting the reform charter, term limits is not one thing that I'm wild about. I will say that. But again, it's done as a package. I give credit to the folks who ran for the Charter Commission, spent their time working on this, trying to educate people. I truly respect that. As someone who is finishing his 16th year on the council, if the term limits were in, it would be my time to now leave the council. And I feel like I'm just getting going. So it's not the perfect plan, the perfect solution. But again, as someone who's running for mayor, however this comes down, you're getting someone who understands how the council works, how effective it can be, how to manage its work. Someone who looks 3-6 months ahead of time, looks at the committee structure, something I've done effectively over 8 years, and that will continue as mayor because you have someone who understands how that body works.
Ruth Ann?
There's such an interesting balance here between democracy, where each person gets to vote for who they want, and putting on term limits, which takes away your right to vote for somebody. What is fascinating to look at here in Newton is how many uncontested races there are, particularly as somebody gets more and more senior in his or her job. So that there's a tension there. The power of incumbency is very real. So they did 16 years for the city council, 12 years for the mayor, 8 years for the school committee. I'd say give it a try. There's another interesting thing about the new charter. Do you know it builds in 10 years from now that we look at the charter again and say, did we get it right? So we'll be on this journey for 10 years, and let's see if the term limits do really, actually they don't kick in. We're all if you were still on the city council, you'd be grandfathered. So it won't really play out in that 10-year period, but we'll get a sense of it.
Okay, I know I'm driving our timer crazy, but I'm just going to throw in a short
And us
question.
too.
We all benefit from the wisdom of experience. Could you each talk about a vote that you have made as alderman or councilor that if you could redo history, you would do differently?
Go ahead, Ruth Ann.
I think what I would redo is there was a time that there's something called stepping outside the rail where you don't take a vote. And I once stepped out of the rail, this is in the last couple of years. A resolution came to us about climate change, and it specifically, I thought, attacked President Obama, so I stepped out. In retrospect, I probably just should have stayed inside and voted because, yes, I care deeply about climate change. So that one has made me uneasy.
Scott?
My dad told me that when I got into this, you sign up, you need to play. You don't step outside the rail, you don't abstain, you only abstain if there's something that you came in late or didn't have information for and will follow up. But I've taken great pride, whether I've taken good votes or bad votes. One thing I always learned from a former boss, State Auditor Joe DiNucci, when I was young, and I went to talk to him about wanting to run for office, he said, you have to be able to get up on your 2 feet, explain what you're doing, and the next day look in the mirror and feel good about what you did. And I've taken probably some good votes, some bad votes, but at the end of the day, you need to be true to yourself, and you need to stand up and take a vote and be accountable.
Okay, so no confession here. Let's move on to infrastructure. Would you talk about your top 3 priorities for infrastructure investments, and also talk about whether you would support a tax override to achieve those?
All in 60 seconds, right?
Less.
So we've got a long list of infrastructure investments in front of us. If I had to prioritize, and this is hard to do, I think I would talk about our roads and streets, which desperately need work, our senior center, which is so almost shameful compared to other communities, and I'd talk about schools. I'm not going to talk about a school. You got to talk about Aquinas, Ward, Countryside, Franklin. But there are others. The list goes on and on. How about the bathhouse at Crystal Lake? How about the hut at Newton Center? How about our police headquarters? It almost makes you breathless how much work we have to do. We are behind in the investment in our capital infrastructure.
Scott?
So I would say, can I say 1A through F? Is that fair? Because I do believe we need to continue the investment in our schools. That is vitally important. And you left off Lincoln Elliott. I know you didn't mean to do that, but my daughter
That's
is there,
Aquinas.
and that's why. So
Excuse me,
There's nothing personal.
Totally
Aquinas
understand.
is Lincoln
all
Elliott,
right, sorry,
right?
I may have been
So-
jotting down my notes, but I know I'm pressed on time. Our roads. Folks, we understand. We've heard what you've said. I've done 74 house parties. At all 74, someone asks about the condition of our roads. We have heard you. We are tripling the investment. We will get our roads done. We need to look at, I've committed to a senior center study in my first year as mayor. I will also look collaboratively with people in this community all throughout from every corner at some sort of dedicated arts center here in the city. I have gone front to back, over and above. Everyone talks about some sort of area where we could enjoy arts and culture under one umbrella here in the city. I'm committed to doing that.
So it sounds as if we should all be hanging on to our wallets, that the override would be sooner rather than later?
Ruth Ann, no, all kidding aside. No, with all seriousness, I think you need to look at the entire package, Margie. I think that it's very important to look at what our bonding capacity is, what our priorities are. I will go on record here to say that I believe debt exclusion overrides are a prudent way to go about capital. I do want to say that that needs to be on the table. Look at public-private partnerships. Look at things that people might want to invest in, like a senior center, like a dedicated arts center. Those are important for our community, and they bring community together. Those are part of those quality of life city services that we all should be talking about here in this city. But all types of financing should be on the table, including a debt exclusion.
Ruth Ann, do you want to add one final word on this before we move on?
Yeah, I haven't said anything about it yet. So yes, I'd be happy to
Well,
talk
she wants
about
a yes
this.
or no answer. That's what she wants.
So we, just a few minutes ago, I believe, unless it was this morning, it's beginning to be a blur, we're talking about affordability and being an inclusive and diverse city. If you believe in affordability, an override has to be your last resort, not your first resort. Just think of all the seniors who are barely hanging on here and all those working families who would like to move in. So an override, SETI did it right in 2013. Remember, we had the enrollment crunch plus a backlog in infrastructure investments. He went out and he made a really good case for it. But instead, remember, finances is my wheelhouse. Let's grow our revenues, commercial office, retail. Let's be really tight on our expenses. Let's prioritize and spread out the work, and let's make sure compensation growth is in line with revenue growth.
Okay, this is a little bit different. I would say that since the 1970s, off and on, I have heard about tensions between the north and south sides of the city. And I wonder what your perception is of those tensions, and what would you as mayor do to ameliorate them? Ruth Ann, you want to start?
This is probably the worst part about running for mayor right now. I have, Scotty lives on the north, I live on the south. There are some other divisions here by religion, by other divisions. This is gender, thank you. That's the I was looking for that. And unfortunately, as I think cordial and as we have been, you're seeing, you notice where the lawn signs are, that there's a division here in the city. You should know that I will be a mayor for all of Newton. I have been knocking on doors in all 32 precincts. When I am mayor, I will be out in every village, every neighborhood, every elementary school. The voices that we have a problem right now, regardless of what happens with the charter. When I am knocking on doors, particularly in the periphery of the city, or less so right in the heart, I hear over and over again that my voice isn't heard, that the mayor isn't genuinely listening to me. I am not influencing decision-making. That will change when there's a Mayor Fuller.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for a mayor to be a unifier of our city, I'm asking you to vote for me on November the 7th. We have over 1,500 lawn signs out all throughout every corner of this city. I am proud of this city. I am a lifelong resident of this city. I plan to take everybody in our city from every corner, liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, race, sexual orientation, bring people together. That has been a skill set of mine for years. I have done that as a community leader. I have done that as a president of the city council. I have been elected 4 times by my colleagues, 3 times unopposed from colleagues all throughout this entire city, because they trust and have the confidence in someone who can take ideas in different viewpoints and put them at the table and work together to get results. I'm proud of my career as president of the city council. I'm proud of being a community leader. And I'm someone that will help bring people together. In terms of divisions or what people are talking about, I look at the promise of Newton and what we can do together. The mayor is the face of the city. And I plan to bring people together no matter what the issue is.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we probably have time for 2 more questions. What parts of Newton's, no, I'm going to scrap that. Parking, SOS, parking. What are you going to do to help parking in the city? Would you develop, if you develop the Newton Center Triangle, where are the cars going to go? I mean, this is one of those everyday questions that really ticks
If you
people
would.
off.
Yeah. When I talk to both business owners and to residents, parking comes up all the time. It really matters. We're still not in a driverless situation yet. So remember those master plans I was talking about? We need to take a step back. When I look at what happened in Newtonville, I was a big supporter of Austin Street, but I think there was probably a lost opportunity there. If we had taken a step back and done a master plan for Austin Street, my guess is that Austin Street parking lot would have had a parking garage there plus a park so that we could build on Walnut Street and go up 3 or 4 stories there to unlock it. So again, in Newton Center, we're going to need a parking garage. Is it behind Walgreens, behind Panera's, over the T-tracks, underneath the triangle? Parking is one of those key things. And one last thing, you can also do really interesting things with the pricing of parking so that there's the right kind of turnover and right kind of parking both for our employees
Okay,
as
we
well
have
as our
a stop
shoppers.
sign. Okay, Scott, I just want to
Just-
say, you're not going to get me on a bike, so talk a little bit about where the cars are going to be.
Is that a challenge?
You lose.
But parking, it's a sort of a double-edged sword. If you build it, they will come, the cars will come. What we're trying to do is get people out of their cars. But we hear loud and clear that the businesses want it. We did, I'll just use the example of Newton Center, our parking strategy. Much input from the business owners there. Not front-of-store parking available, unfriendly enforcement, lack of long-term spaces, and we need to take that on a citywide initiative to look at parking so that we can accommodate the businesses, help our residents in the impact, and at the same time, get people out of their cars. That's one thing we've been hearing about loud and clear.
All right, well, the corollary of all this is, everyone is for improved public transit. It's been an issue for decades in this city, but what specifically can a Newton mayor do, and how would you pay for it?
This is public transit, the
Yes.
MBTA. So there's
Well,
two-
it's also, are there more opportunities for crosstown traffic that wouldn't be serviced by the state system?
So there's a lot the mayor can do, and I am dedicated to doing this, and there's multi-pronged strategy here. Certainly, we're going to want to be looking more and more at private-public shuttles. So up and down Needham Street, for example, we already have some being run by private companies. Let's open those up so that other people can get on them. I will be an advocate with the MBTA for more reliable, more accessible, more frequent service here. We're also going to have to step up with funding. You noticed that we've been approving some projects in Newtonville, Austin Street, Washington Place, Court Street, now Sunrise. Do you know, with none of them did we require the developers to put some money in a pot, because we need a pot of money if we're going to get the accessibility for that commuter rail. We can't depend just on the MBTA. We're going to need developers' funds and probably city funds to do it as well. We're going to need funding.
Scott?
We cannot do it alone. Margie, that's the key. We need to take a regional approach to what we're talking about with public transportation. Yes, we have the ability to work with other cities and towns. In fact, we need to do better. We are doing a good job in communicating well with our partners in Needham, but I can tell you, Newton and Watertown and Waltham are not talking, and we are not doing a good job of that. We have to take that regional approach to find ways to get people out of their cars and work together. Work with our businesses to talk about the development of shuttles or how we can move people around. Yes, absolutely need to be a strong advocate with the state. Prove to the state. We've built projects at Austin Street or Washington Place, or they've been permitted. We're building you ridership. Please come to the table, and as we are looking at in our transportation strategy, we are starting to explore and working on bike share, car share, forcing businesses for T-subsidies of their employees. All these things together are tools in our toolkit that we'll need to work on together.
Okay, our final question in this marathon. Scott, you're a finance manager. Ruth Ann, you're a strategic consultant. How would those backgrounds differently affect how you would lead the city? Let's start with you, Scott.
Well, I feel that in our city, we have a number of plans that have been put together. We have our transportation strategy, our roads plan, our long-term liabilities plan. Many of those plans, our housing plan, they've been put together. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't take those and put your own input into those as the chief executive officer of the city. But I believe that in terms of planning is vitally important. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. However, you need someone who's able and ready to take these plans and implement them and get the job done. That is something that I have been doing for over 20 years professionally every day of my life, and also been doing it on the city level for 16 years. Someone who's ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work and ensure you have someone who's ready to lead this city on day one, and that's what you'll be getting from me in the mayor's office.
Ruth Ann?
I'm not just a strategic thinker who thinks can take complicated problems and come up with creative solutions. I've been for 30 years getting action, putting those into place, revising plans, making them work. We have complex challenges in front of us here in the city of Newton. You're seeing how we have so much work to do on our infrastructure, the $1 billion that we owe our retirees, housing prices that are making it so unaffordable to live here. So housing, education, transportation, economic development, these all intersect. You need a creative thinker who thinks big but within our means. That's what I've been doing for 30 years. That's the leadership I've shown both in the business world, in the nonprofit sector, here at City Hall. That's the leader I will be as mayor.
Okay, as you are departing, if there were 3 words or phrases that you want to leave in the minds of this audience, what would those be? Ruth Ann, you want to go first?
Vision, experience, getting work done.
That's okay.
3 ideas, how about that?
3 words: tested, trusted, and committed. That is what I have been saying on this campaign for the last year. You're getting someone who has all 3 of those: tested in terms of work, trusted in terms of work, and committed as someone who's committed to this city for their entire life.
Thank you very much. You know, we are...
Thank you. Good job. Good job.
You know, we are...
One more. I thought you meant that.
Oh, that too.
We are so lucky to have 2 great candidates in the city to choose from. And I want to thank you so much for, putting up with the quick ride.
It's worth it. It's worth it.
Now you get
It's
to go on to the next
one.
one. And now we're going to start with Ward 1, as Sally said. Here are a few fun facts to know and tell. The Newton schools serve more than 13,000 students. There's a preschool, 15 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 2 high schools, and an alternative high school. The budget this year was nearly $220 million, which was a 3.9% increase over last year's. Salaries and benefits make up 85% of the budget. And we are going to have a very tight 15 minutes for each race. So there are a couple of questions that come up in every race and among every questioner. People have talked about full-day kindergarten for years. Everybody's for it, as far as I can see. Where are we in the process, and how could you, if elected, help to make that happen? Let's start with Kathy Markey.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here, and to the council for bringing us all together. So full-day kindergarten has been something that's on the table, been discussed for a long time, and the research shows that we should be moving forward with this as well. What I would like to do is make sure that we're getting reports from the committees that are formed to explore this, and that we're making sure we go ahead and arrange full-day kindergarten. I think it's clear that our families need it. It'll level the playing field for families whose kids are not in preschool, and for our children who are already in preschool full day, they certainly are ready, and this will ensure that they are ready for the rigor of first grade. So it is necessary for us to come together as a school committee and make sure this happens.
Bridget?
Okay. I agree with Kathy as far as that it's something that's very important to the community, and we should push it through. Right now, the full-day kindergarten is included in the system-wide goals for the school committee. And we know that we have the resources to be able to implement this because we don't have to add teachers. It's just a matter of extending the day for all of the students to go full-time. And so I believe the school district realizes that it's very important and that we need to move forward. And I think if I was on the school committee, I would ask for a time frame and the planning time that we're going to implement this, so that we know and we can communicate to the community what we've done. Because I know that it's kind of lingering that, when are we going to have this full-day kindergarten? So for me, I believe this is important for parents, especially where you have two working parents. Thank you.
I have to apologize because I was supposed to introduce you with a little bit of background, but with all of the transitions. So Kathy has worked for the Newton Public Schools, has been involved with the Center Street Food Pantry and the Child Care Scholarship Fund, and now works at MIT. And Bridget is an engineer with an MBA and is involved with the PTSO at Newton North and volunteers for the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Whew. Okay, now here's another chronic question. Another when will they ever? The American Academy of Pediatrics cites statistics about teenagers' chronic sleep deprivation and sees early high school start times as a public health issue. The school committee has been talking about delaying start times again for years. How can you make it happen?
So I think it's very important to parents, and as you said, the research shows that it's a health issue. It also helps to improve if we extend go later in school, that the students perform better, their grades increase, their test scores also increase. And as a parent of a junior at Newton North, I understand it. I've had teachers tell me that my son is falling asleep in the morning in school. So I do think that this is a health issue that we need to push forward. I think the earliest that we would probably anticipate something like this would be probably 2019, because there are things that have to be addressed. We have principals, the two principals and teachers looking at how do we restructure the day, because it means you have to push the day later, but then you still have to start at end at a certain time because of after-school care. Students have obligations at home in the evenings and et cetera. So I think definitely I will push that through and try to understand how does the schedule work. My only concern is that we give kids the time that they're not going from back to back to back to back classes, some X block time to really focus and pull together and organize their time.
Kathy?
So this is a long-term investment in our young people. Later high school start time is important for our young people for their academic success as well as their mental health. So when our kids are experiencing a lot of stress, and this is one of the ways in which we can address that. So as a parent, I too, recall and remember what it was like to get kids up and out early in the day and to keep busy and full lives. But I think that what we can do is work on this, and my experience in Newton is to work collaboratively with the Newton Public Schools and with different school buildings, with community organizations to work on problems or projects that we wanted to see happen. And some of the things I've done under the federal grants that I was overseeing allowed me the opportunity to develop really great relationships and look at how do we collaborate to solve problems. And that's what I would hope to do in addressing this issue.
You mentioned school buildings. We've seen Ainger and Zervis and now Cabot. Where do we go next? And in making decisions about what schools need replacement or rehab, how do you sort out questions of equity across the city?
Yeah.
Kathy?
I think, again, equity across the city, if you live in Newton and your kids are going to the Newton Public Schools, it should not matter which side of the city you live on, which building your kids are zoned for, the education your children are receiving is the same across the city, and also within the building, it doesn't matter which classroom you've been assigned to. So I think equity across the city is essential, and when we look at the buildings, there is a plan to determine which schools go next and how we use the swing space that we have, and again, asking that we get ongoing and consistent reports from this process. How is it going? What schools are next? How are we managing things and maintaining the buildings that we have so that not just the physical building, but also the academic learning spaces and the technology and everything that's needed for a successful education for our young people is part of this plan. So constant reports and information coming back and forth to the school committee is essential for this.
Okay. I definitely think equity across Newton schools is important. I think we need to ensure that all of the schools have the appropriate space, especially for students in need, to be able to do language and special needs programs. And we don't have that equity across the schools because the schools are older. However, I would be definitely on the committee asking the questions of what do we need to do as far as a planning long-term, because we are only now looking at elementary schools that are on the plan, and we need to start looking at middle and high school as well because those populations are growing. The next school that's on the list is Lincoln Elliott, as Scott talked about, where we're looking at improving the Qantas Center and moving them to that location. And so we are, the school committee and the mayor and everyone are working on how do we fund the next project. And so I would definitely be on that committee, and I think my background in budgeting, understanding how to make trade-offs and really looking at what are the opportunities and also long-term planning, I think it's very important in looking at our facilities for our schools.
Okay, before we continue to my questions or audience questions, we have on cards questions that each candidate wants to ask of the other. And I think I stepped on somebody's line because Bridget had a question for Kathy about how would you promote diversity in schools and what can our schools do better? But
yeah, I'm happy to speak more to that. There are a number of things that I have done here in Newton. So I have been the acting executive director as a volunteer of the Child Care Scholarship Fund, which addresses low-income families' challenges to meet their after-school and out-of-school time care. I've been a mentor for 2 young people for more than 25 years, as has my husband. And I've been engaged in this community, address it also through the Center Street Food Pantry. So looking at how our community, what our community looks like, and ensuring that everyone feels that they have a seat at the table, and that we are looking and thinking about individuals' needs and our families' needs that are not just simply a matter of where they live or what their what their address is, but what are the individual needs that help our community be diverse, and continuing to support the METCO program for similar reasons.
Okay. There's some experience here on the PTSOs. Do you, apropos of diversity, do you think that there should be a cap on what the parent, teacher, student organizations may spend? Well, why don't you address that issue?
Sure.
Kathy.
Okay. When I was a PTO president in New York City, this came up quite a bit as well, and we talked a lot about what that looked like. And the way we handled it in New York City was that the different parent organizations within the building were able to raise money or develop partnerships with corporations or sponsorship, and that was all shared equally across the building. So it didn't matter which classroom or which parent it was, it came in to the building and it was shared by all. And I think that that certainly is something that could be proposed here in Newton, and that the PTSOs would be looking at how they support all students across the district and not be directed at a particular school building or classroom, or and the work that I did under the Tiger Athletic Booster Club was the same thing at Newton North. So I was the president of the Booster Club, and our idea there was the same, was to ensure that we were supporting all student athletes. It was not a football or a swim team or anything. It was really about supporting all student athletes.
My turn?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is important for equity across the schools. As Kathy talked about, that we need to ensure that whatever monies we are raising, that it's being allocated across all students. It's not to particular students. And I know that, there is a very diverse community as far as socioeconomic in Newton, so every parent is unable to always give to a PTO, where someone else may be able to give more. And so we just need to make sure that that's being spread across all of the schools as well as across the students. And so, I think it's an equity concern that we need to, make sure we address.
Okay, how are we doing in the area of STEAM topics, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math? And how will you sustain support when upfront funding in the form of grants can no longer be counted upon? What do you see dropping, and what are you committed to sustaining?
Okay.
Bridget.
So I'm an engineer. So STEAM and STEM are very important to me. I think for how do we sustain it is to really look at private and public partnerships. I think it's just not something that you can leave on the school, because you need to understand what is needed as a career, what do companies look for, and to ensure that our STEAM program is very current as far as what we're teaching our children in the school. And I think if you look at being able to fund it with public and private partnerships, that also helps as well. And I think Scott talked a little bit about that, and I look for that in the schools, because I'm used to, or I've experienced working with private organizations who come in and do enrichment programs for the students, such as Girls Code or Black Girls Code, to support the schools. And for me, I really want to encourage more female participation, especially in the middle schools, because I think that's where students lose that connection with science and technology.
Kathy?
Well, I can speak to one project that I supported while working for the Newton Public Schools specifically. So the calculus project, with which some people may be familiar with, supports participation in upper-level math programs for students, minority students who were not represented or had not been represented in upper-level calculus. One of the projects that I oversaw was under a federal grant. We did some work together with the project so they had their summer program and they had this whole math component they were managing. We didn't need to get involved in that, but what we were able to do was support the ropes course at Newton South, which engaged students in team building and ensured that they really felt the cohort of students so that they could stay in and maintain their participation at the upper level math programs. And so I think that is a great example of how my experience in Newton would allow me to look at these kinds of programs and how do we ensure that, again, that young girls and women are represented in these STEAM programs.
Thank you very much. Margaret Albright is running for her third term on the school committee. She holds an MBA and runs her own business working with nonprofits in education, healthcare, and social service. Cyrus Vega, is that the right? Okay, is a graduate of the Newton Public Schools. He's currently a college student and is working as a licensed realtor. Welcome to both of you. 60 years ago, when some in this audience grew up, Newton High was routinely included in lists of the top 10 high schools in the country. 40 years ago, our system was among the state's top 3 public school systems. Now the high schools are ranked either 405 or 677 in national rankings. Now, even in the state, Newton South is ranked 15th, and Newton North is ranked 33rd. So let's concede all the flaws with ranking systems. But I wonder, when we continue to fund the schools so generously, with such a large percentage of the city's budget, why have we slipped? And let's start with Margaret.
Well, I'm not sure that it's so much we've slipped. I'm wondering what the criteria is that we're ranking schools on now. Because as someone who works in this area, I know that one of the big things that they use in the ranking criteria is how are you doing with low-income and minority students in order to advance them? And while we are probably doing a good job, the number of students that we have that are in those high-risk groups is much smaller than in many parts of the country and in many parts of the state. Also, 40 years ago, we didn't have criteria that we use now to evaluate our schools. There was no MCAS. So things were much more subjective in terms of how we ranked and how we looked at schools. Now we are using the same measure for everybody. And when we do that, we see things differently. And frankly, I think that our schools do a really good job and that we can do a better job, but I'm not so worried about rankings.
Okay, Cyrus?
Hey, can you just repeat the question for me? Is that okay?
Well, how about I just compress it
Okay, sure.
to reflect on the drop in Newton high schools and in the Newton public schools in national and state rankings over an extended period of time.
Sure, thank you. There's a lot of reasons why the rankings dropped, and they obviously have. We can see that home prices, if we look at Newton versus Weston, Newton versus Wellesley, there's a reason why Wellesley home prices have gone up significantly more than Newton, even though it is further away from Boston. One of the most important reasons, and there's many reasons here, is because of the drugs in our schools, and that's why I've actually come here today with a petition for all of our school committee candidates that would ask for an independent study of the drug issue in our school. Parents do realize this, and all it takes is one incident to compound, then they hear about that. That is what makes people decide whether they're going to move to Newton or Wellesley or Weston or another close area. So I really think it's important for Red Ribbon Week, which is coming up, Anti-Drug Week, that we make sure we really step up in the forefront of this issue. Thank you.
Well, let's build on that, Margaret. Schools today are called on to teach things that go far beyond academics. It's educating students about substance abuse, other issues related to student health, stress, suicide, violence, sexual behavior, and so on. So what should the school's priorities be in those areas, and what more should they be doing, and what would you do about it?
Well, you know, it's a pretty complex issue, and unfortunately, one that I have some personal experience with. I have family members that have been in rehab and in jail. It happens in every family. It's not, you know, to do with Newton or Weston or Wellesley or anything else. It happens everywhere. I think in Newton, we understand that there's that you know, our kids are under a lot of stress. I don't know if any of you read the recent article in the New York Times that talked about how much more stress adolescents are under now than they were even 25 years ago. So one of the things that we do in Newton that hardly any other school district does is we routinely screen for depression. We routinely screen for substance abuse. It's something that we need to work on as a community. This needs to have the health department, the city council, the police, our school nurses, everybody working together, because it's not just a school issue.
Cyrus?
Thank you. I hear a very reactionary tone from the school committee, to be brutally honest. What I think is happening is that this issue is being looked at only after incidents happen. Now, I was the only school committee candidate to show up to the Program and Service Committee meeting at the Newton City Council last week, where Dr. Chris Larai then presented on the importance of a later start time, and that's why I'm here today talking about it, because all these issues do intersect with each other. But to think that we're going to solve them across the board is not realistic. But we can start with one thing, making school later, and I think that will compound, as I said earlier, and will help us solve these issues. Thank you.
All right, that leads me right into the candidates' questions of each other. We'll jump to that timer. This question is from Cyrus to Margaret. Because you believe in later start times, will you join me in pledging not to run in 2 years' time if you are unable to accomplish them?
No.
And question from Margaret to Cyrus. If elected, how would you build relationships with your colleagues and central administration to advance your priorities?
I think my biggest relationships right now is actually with the students. I've met one-on-one with special education students, and I've talked to them about their issue, and actually earned the endorsement of a group of special education students from Newton North High School. So I think my colleagues, I might be a little pushing myself up a bit, but they actually might come to me to get a student's perspective on what's going on in the schools. Thank you.
The full-day kindergarten issue, talked about it for years. How can we make that happen? Well, and also, are you thinking about an annual fee from parents, scholarships for those who can't afford it? I mean, how is this going to work, and how do you get it off the dime?
Well, so I'm a sitting school committee member, and anyone who's watched those meetings has heard me say over and over and over again, full-day kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, full-day kindergarten. Unfortunately, one person cannot make anything happen on the committee. It takes a majority of votes to make things move forward. And we are moving forward. This year, it is in the system-wide goals. There's a task force putting together a plan. We expect to see a report from that task force in March. I am pushing like crazy for us to get this started as soon as possible. We have an assistant superintendent for elementary who is a former kindergarten teacher, so she gets it. And we are working on it, and it is going to happen. I promise you that. If it's the last thing I do in the school committee, we will have full-day kindergarten.
Cyrus?
I stand with what every school committee candidate stands with full-day kindergarten, and I know it is in the goals for this year. I just say actions speak louder than words. This really gets back to the drug issue, later start times as well. I've seen minimal action there. Thank you.
Cyrus, I've seen in coverage of past debates that you've talked about the curriculum in Newton being outdated. What did you mean by that, and how would you change it?
Sure. One example I always talk about is financial literacy. Many students graduate from high school, but they don't even know what a credit card is or how to balance a checkbook. What I think needs to happen is a mandatory financial literacy class for all students graduating from high school. That, I think, is one example how to solve that. Thank you.
Margaret?
Well, so this is one of the areas where I actually have a lot of experiences in the area of curriculum. So in Massachusetts, we have standard-based curriculum, and those standards are set by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. So we have a list for each course and each grade level of what students need to know when they leave that grade level. And Newton's curriculum aligns with those standards. We work very hard to do that, and in fact, we spent the last 3 or 4 years aligning to new standards in science and ELA. We're working on them in math. The history standards are currently being reviewed by the state and will be revised and sent out to us probably in a year and a half, and then we will be revising that curriculum to align with those standards. We have to do this. This is what we are required to do by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. As for the financial literacy, we're now in the second year of a grant from the State Treasurer's Office, and that is being taught at our high schools to seniors, particularly around the issue of student debt and how to manage their own finances in college.
Okay. With an ever-increasing percentage of the population being older, not having children in the school system, what can you do to reassure them that their fixed incomes are being respected in the school committee budgeting process? And let's start with Cyrus.
I mean, personally, as a licensed realtor, I don't believe that's the case. And one of the reasons I'm actually interested in the school committee is because I feel that our older population of seniors is really not being accounted for when talking about both budget, but also talking about well-being right now. If you live near Newton North, near the senior center, you know that students go all the way out there to smoke because they're not allowed to within 900 feet. What happens is students, they go away from the classroom, and guess what? They don't return to the classroom. In terms of seniors, I think they're not being looked at. I think the school committee right now is looking really just for those students who are going to elite schools, but it's totally missing the ball for those students who are in the middle level, who are going to go into UMass Amherst and schools like that, which unfortunately is the majority of students. Thank you.
So we were talking about budget, right? So one of the things that I take very seriously is our budget, and you will notice that our budget went up 3.9% this year. However, we also had an increase in salary and benefits that exceeded that 3.9%, plus we had a growth in student population. So the growth in our school budget, if we were to just maintain things as they were, would have been more than 3.9%. Instead, we stayed within that limit, and we ended up cutting 26.6 full-time equivalents from our budget. I'm concerned about the coming year. 85% of our costs are salary and benefits. I don't know if you read recently about the rise in health insurance costs, but the people who run the connector just told the governor the health insurance on the connector is going up 24%. We've got problems ahead, and we're going to have to figure out what to do.
In the final minutes of this mini debate, I would like to address a financial problem that preceded this health thing, and that is that although the total budget of the school department went up 3.9%, the cost of transportation was out of control, and there were special ed was adjusted for an 11% increase, and when you put together regular and special ed costs, it was a 21% increase. How did that happen, and how do you prevent it from happening again?
Well, we were really kind of surprised by that, and we had put our bus contract goes out to competitive bid. We had one bidder, and that bidder came back at 27% over what the price was. And the main reason is that the costs for him in terms of storing his buses have gone up considerably. So we worked very hard to find a way to find some lower cost places to store the buses when they're not being used within Newton. But I started asking around and asking other school districts, have you seen this kind of thing? And I heard from districts all across the state, we only had one bid or two. And our costs went up 15, 20, 25%. So this is a problem that we're all having. As for special ed, that also went out to bid, and it came back much, much higher. I think we're paying for the cost of parking, with real estate being, the price for renting parking going way up, and for the traffic that drivers are having to deal with.
Cyrus?
Sounds like another government bid where the bidder is already chosen beforehand, if you ask me. My father works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I hear stories like this all the time. I don't want to talk about the financial aspect of that, but I do think it's really, really important that we look at more neighborhood schools, more walking to school, electric vehicles that are going to be on the roads in the future. And I think we really need to look to the future to deal with this issue, but I don't think there's a very easy solution for that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. Anping Shen is an education specialist at the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Eileen Sandberg is a health economist at Tufts Medical Center and has chaired the Newton Parent Advisory Council on Special Ed. Both candidates have had children in the Newton schools and have been involved themselves. Let's start with that wonderful full-day education topic. Talking about it for years, how are you going to make it happen? Let's start with you.
Full-day kindergarten? Yes,
Full-day.
okay. Yeah, I think that full-day kindergarten is a high priority. All of the candidates for the school committee are in favor of it. It has moved forward with the school committee to the point where it's in the system-wide goals, as we've heard, and also has a working group looking at how to make it a reality. It's a very important priority, both for working families and for our kids, because there's data that shows that socially and academically it helps prepare them better for first grade. So I totally support it. I think it's a great idea, and I look forward to seeing how we make it work.
Anping?
Yes, I totally agree with all the people who have expressed their view, and I'd like to add a little bit of my personal story. Came from China, and my son was 3 years old, and at that time I was a graduate student, so I need some part-time work, and my wife need to do some work too. So it was a wonderful idea, not only for logistic reasons and financial reasons, but also for educational reasons. Why? Because my son needed some kind of, learning in this new culture, language culture. So in that sense, I would say that for past 10 years, there are more and more families moving from overseas, including from Asian countries and China, and not many families are well-to-do. They move to Newton. Why? Because Newton has excellent school system. And they sacrifice everything to move to Newton. And so in that sense, they need support. So that's also for pragmatic reasons. But I wholeheartedly support all the other reasons, for educational and for learning purposes. Thanks.
Right now, we have grants for a variety of things, like social and emotional learning and the calculus project and leveled literacy intervention. But if those grants go away, what are the Newton schools prepared to do to sustain the activities? And if not, which ones get dropped? Let's start with Anping.
This is a very difficult issue, and a lot of discussion has been already going on now. And I think I will fully support the curriculum, breadth of this curriculum, which gives students a wonderful opportunity to learn all kinds of subjects, especially in STEAM area. And for my son and my daughter, my son now is an adult, and I could see he's working in the entrepreneurship area, and he started his company, and he needs a lot of skills. And my daughter just started her college education at Cornell College of Engineering, and I could see that math education is very critical. So I think in this sense, we don't have a magic solution to solve the problem, but I think if Newton families strongly support good education, educational excellence, I think we have to work together. And I, for one, will strongly support any initiative to get the funding, to work with school system, to work with family, to provide those excellent courses and curriculum to families. Thanks.
Eileen?
The programs that you're talking about are very important. We've started a social emotional learning program in the last few years, particularly in the elementary schools, and I believe that it does need to be continued, but it has been funded by a federal grant that it is uncertain, we'll say, whether it will be renewed in the next year. So we will face whether we can come up with the money to support that. I think it's a very, very important priority for our students. It helps them to be more well-rounded people who can collaborate and work together, and they just really need those skills. So I support doing everything that we can to find the funding to keep that program going. Similarly, programs like the Calculus Initiative are done with support from the Newton Schools Foundation, and again, I think that's an important program, particularly for helping our minority students to develop their mathematics skills and to address our achievement gap. So yes, I support that as well.
Okay, the two candidates, questions of each other. Question from Ann Ping to Eileen. How can the Newton Public Schools handle the large number of families moving to Newton in the coming years?
This is a really important question. The question, I think, ties into our mayoral debate about development, because one of the things that keeps coming up when we discuss development is what happens if we have an influx of students into our schools. We have some room within some of our larger elementary schools and our new schools, but we also have middle schools that are at or close to capacity. And we really have to think about what we're going to do if we have a large number of students moving into the district. We plan pretty carefully for enrollment growth, and our forecasts have gotten much better over the past few years. But when large new developments come in, that really is a challenge, and it just has to be worked out with the mayor and the city council on really long-term planning to figure out what we're going to do about it.
And question from Eileen to Ann Ping. How important is Newton's achievement gap, and would you support further efforts to address it?
Well, to narrow achievement gap has been a statewide goal for past at least 5 years. I work at State Department of Education in Student Assessment Office. That's our primary goal. And in Newton, I think we have been doing very well in that sense. And for past few years, there's a lot of emphasis on a narrow achievement gap, which include the students from the underprivileged or the underserviced families, underrepresented families, and special needs students. It's a huge challenge we have to admit. Why? Newton has about 20% of special needs students. When I threw that number to the residents, and some were surprised, and that's very high. Statewide, about 17%, but some other districts only have about 13 and 12%. And that's the being successful, and you pay a little bit price. Why? Newton has attracted a lot of families come in. So we have to work together. And that's the part of Newton's core values for education excellence and equity for whole child development. And I strongly support that. I'm willing to work very hard to keep doing that.
This is kind of a related question. The number of students that are classified as English learners has increased by 42% since 2007, and this number does not include the additional 51 preschoolers identified as English learners this school year. So what changes, if any, are needed in the rate at which these students are integrated into the mainstream system?
Okay.
Yes.
We actually have a pretty good record in Newton for, of course, when children first come in as English language learners, they need to learn English to be able to learn within our classrooms. But if you look at the statistics for our kids who have started out as English language learners over a period of time, they tend to do very well. I think that we do a good job overall with handling English language learners, but there's certainly, I think, room for improvement in most areas.
Ann Ping?
Well, certainly that's my area. When I came here, of course, my son was an English language learner, and also for past few years, I given a lot of workshop seminars talking about the wonderful education system in Newton. I even wrote an article and published in China to say how wonderful Newton school system is. I might be responsible for introducing some families from China. But of course, difference now, they're pretty rich. They bought a multi-million-dollar house here. And luckily, I got some lawn signs put on their property. So my point is, we need to work with these families, even though they are pretty well-to-do, but their kids learning English, their children learning English needs still there. And that's the beauty of the Newton school system. These families moving, even though they have cultural language challenges, but they're willing to work hard to support their children, support the school system. I think that's a strength of Newton's system. I want to work on that strength and make Newton's system even better. Thank you.
To what extent are the current boundaries of school districts an appropriate reflection of population needs, and what further changes in school assignments might need to be made? Let's start with you, Eileen.
Oh, all right. Well, school assignment is always a tricky issue because families want to be having their children going to school with their neighbors, and sometimes that doesn't happen because we have to move the lines of school assignment to meet enrollment growth. It's a constantly moving target, and it's something that the district works very hard on and the school committee works very hard on. I think when you're looking at situations where you have a new school built with added capacity, like we have with service, some of the lines were moved. It's just a matter of really trying to balance our schools so that we can keep our class sizes effective.
Yes, and I understand this is a challenge. When during my canvas, I talked to many families. Some families, they are really concerned their kids because they don't have the elementary school in their area, and that's a huge challenge. And not only the safety, but also the traffic, and which create additional problems for the school zone and for community-wide when you add a lot of traffic. And I think that the school has to have a good long-term planning. I was sitting on the school street planning a few years back, and I think that's very important. In the future, we have to be careful not to make the mistake we made years ago when school population dropped and we closed schools, we sold the school buildings, now we're facing the problem. So I think the strategic planning is very critical, and of course, we need to hear from Newton residents, communities, and to gather the input. Make sure that we work together for educational excellence.
In a recent debate, some audience questions had gone unaddressed. One asked about the problem of what was described as anti-Semitic curriculum in the Newton Public Schools. Another asked about ensuring, quote, objective standards of historical honesty. And a third raised questions about what she described as indoctrinated school curriculum. We hear these suggestions out in the community, but they all relate to the underlying theme of what role should the school committee play regarding the content of curriculum. And let's start with you, Anping.
I have to say I heard quite a few times during my canvas regarding this issue, and I certainly paid attention to what was going on years ago, and I think this is very complicated issues, and in terms of worldwide culture, political, different perspectives, I think that Newton school system did pretty good job at that time. I think they had an open discussion, and I understand the curriculum was stopped at that time, and after a lot of investigation and community-wide hearings. But I understand that some parents are not very happy, and I can understand that. Why? Because there's some issues related to the issues in China, and I understand. I could be honest with you. What about Taiwan situation? Those issues are very complicated when the national and political issues involved. I think Newton school system had to be open-minded, gather more input, and make sure that the curriculum are well developed. But also, we have to address that the curriculum should be open-minded, critical thinking, and there could be challenges. So we cannot have all same curriculum for same school, and sometimes teachers do have a little bit of leeway to develop their curriculum, but school, again, has to be very, very careful to provide the guidelines to make sure there are no outside the boundaries.
Thank you. Eileen?
I think that this can be a really difficult issue that the school committee faces. The school committee doesn't set the curriculum, it is set by the school department in conjunction with the requirements of the Board of Education. And in cases where parents are offended or troubled by items that are in the teaching materials, I think it's just really important that it comes to the school committee, that we talk it over publicly, that the school department is allowed to react to it. And as Anping said, I agree, we have to be open and fair, and we also have to be really clear that we value a diversity of opinions in our district.
Thank you both very much. The candidates from Ward 8 for school committee are Matthew Miller, who has been involved in the schools and community. He's the owner of an executive search firm. He and his husband are raising 3 boys in Oak Hill Park. Gail Spector, the parent of 2 Newton-educated children, is the author of Legendary Locals of Newton. She covered Newton for 18 years as a correspondent for the Boston Globe, editor of the Newton Tab, and blogger at Village 14. I'd like to just pick up on the question that we ended the last mini debate with, this whole notion of what role the school committee plays regarding the content of curriculum, especially in response to the kinds of questions. You were here, you heard the kinds of questions about, biased curriculum, historical inaccuracy, and these are tied to the whole social context of the Newton schools. So let's start with Matt.
Sure. Well, as Eileen said, we are not in charge of developing the curriculum. That job belongs to the school department. However, we do hear from citizens, and we want to take in that information. And if there are concerns, we want to make sure that we're addressing it. I know that part of the discussion was about the obtainability of the information online. So questioning, should we be putting textbooks online? Should the parents and Newton residents have the information available in front of them? And that is something that we can consider and talk about. And I would like to explore that option. I do feel that Newton residents, if they have concerns, we should be taking that seriously and making decisions that are a good compromise for both those residents and giving the flexibility to the teachers and coming up with something that works.
Gail?
Newton, the school committee doesn't get involved, as others have said, the school committee doesn't get involved in curriculum, so I think it's important that we keep hands off on that. But we should be listening to the parents. I mean, these are important issues, and I think we should be making sure that the school department is seeking other positions and other opinions when this stuff comes up. I know with some of the concerns about the anti-Semitic curriculum, the DESE, the Department of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education, weighed in on it, and the ADL weighed in on it, and I think it's, so we need to be looking to the experts, or encouraging the school department to be looking to the experts.
Okay, now this is played out in some of the stories that have hit the newspapers about racist slurs and anti-Semitic slurs, and it's connected to this whole notion of what the schools are called upon to teach today in terms of social behavior, assaultive behavior, and then moving into suicide and violence and emotional intelligence and so on. How would you sustain the efforts and even expand the efforts that have been made in Newton in those non-academic areas? Let's start with you, Gail.
The social and emotional learning is a very important part of the curriculum, and I think it's important that we we continue to support that over the years. I think at the high school level, stress is a very big issue, and I know that the most recent Youth Risk Behavior Survey said that 75% of students are either somewhat stressed or very stressed, and I think we need to be paying attention to that as well. As far as I missed the beginning part of your question, the curriculum, the
Well,
anti-Semitic.
the non-academic curriculum, and how do you sustain it and particularly continue to pay for it if some of these things are funded by grants and those grants may go away?
Well, the other thing we need to be doing is bringing in the parents and making it a community effort to educate our children on some of these things. So that's what I would add.
All right, how do you
Can I
think, oh, I'm
answer?
sorry, go.
Don't skip me, Marjorie.
I'm sorry.
Social emotional, the reason I wanted to make sure I got an answer is because this is a topic that is extremely important to not only myself, but my community, my family, and everyone I know that's is dealing with a child in the Newton Public School System. Katie Stack, who was the young woman in Newton who took her life very sadly a few years ago, was our family's babysitter. In our family, we have dealt with this directly, and we know that stress can quite literally be a killer. So I place equal importance on social and emotional learning as I do with academics. I had an hour-long chat with Karen Schmuckler, who's the assistant and superintendent of special education. So so it basically is involved with things like Responsive Classroom, which is our social emotional learning program that was mentioned earlier. And both of us agree, we want to get on the same page. We want programs that work, that are efficient, and that are broad, that are in elementary, middle, and senior high. And the biggest issue we can address right now is high school start time. That will dramatically improve the stress level and the health of all students for the long run. So there's things we could do now.
Gail, what about that, late start times?
I completely agree with Matthew. Changing the high school start times is really important. As the parent of two kids who went to high school, and I had a difficult time getting them out of bed pretty much every morning, so that's important. What's also important, though, is the schedule in the high schools. Right now, the principals are working, the current systems are old, the block system at each of the high schools. And the current principals are trying to work out a new schedule. And it's important when we change the times, we have to change everything, and we have to be well coordinated, and we have to make sure we only do it once. You have to get it right. So, but I do support the effort.
Why is it taking so long, though? I mean, both, I will say, with late start times and with full-day kindergarten. What are the obstacles to making this happen when it's being discussed year after year after year?
I've been a
Matt?
part of this conversation about high school start time since it first came up. I was PTO president at Memorial Spalding and Oak Hill at the same time, and at PTO Council, this issue was raised by the PTO at Concerned Parents at Newton South and Newton North. And the reason it's taking so long is because there are serious logistical issues such as finances, kids who after school have jobs, who have sporting events, teachers who this would be a dramatic change to their schedule, and ultimately the collective bargaining process. However, I'm the type of person who I actually don't think it needs to be, we're never going to get it perfect. We could go into infinity trying to foresee the future with a crystal ball. We're going to have to get our best plan forward and take that leap of faith and work with it as it goes. And I'm happy to see that we're actually moving forward with the plan on September 2019 to roll out, and I would support that.
Gail, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, the other reason it's taking so long is that there are trade-offs that need to be made. The estimate for full-day kindergarten is $1.2 million, and in order to spend that money, it has to come from someplace else, and I think that's a big part of it. And changing the start times is it's a huge endeavor. It's gonna mean changing transportation, and it's gonna involve more money that has to come from someplace else.
I want to make sure to get in the questions that you've written to each other. question from Matt to Gail. If you could add one program to the Newton Public Schools, what would it be?
Full-day kindergarten. It would. I think early intervention is very important, and I think it's important that, we've been talking about that as long as I've been covering Newton, which is many kindergartners ago, and I think it's something we need to be adding.
All right, to Matthew from Gail. You have said that you won't outsource or put teachers in the group insurance commission. Are you willing to cut teachers to make up that financial difference?
So the budget is a complicated process. We have many competing priorities, as Gail alluded to earlier. When I look at the budget and the deficit, I look at it in two different ways. Number one is partnering with the mayor to make sure that there's sufficient budget allocation. And that's going to be, depending on my already current relationship with city officials and school officials, to make sure that the mayor and city council stay informed and know what's happening in the school and the trade-offs that are at stake. The other way that I look at the budget is to take a look at line items and make sure that we're not cutting programs that are going to be impossible to bring back. So actually, I would not be looking at teachers, but rather scaling back on programs that we can keep the programs, scale them back temporarily, communicate to our citizens that know that this is difficult, and explain our long-term goal to reinstate the programs in full capacity.
Can I say something else?
Absolutely.
I'm curious as to how you cut programs without cutting teachers.
No, I did not say cut programs. I said scale programs.
How you
Scale back.
scale back programs without scaling back teachers. I mean, teachers are the people, are the human beings for the programs.
Mm-hmm. So when I say scale back programs, it can just be directed towards a temporary cut or something where the teachers would be directed elsewhere within the Newton Public Schools.
Well, here's a related budgetary issue, and I hear about this issue from neighbors who have children in elementary and junior high school. You have talked about, in previous debates, I think, reasonable class size. And class size is a real concern to people in Newton. What is reasonable class size, and how elastic is the definition based on funds?
Also, that's a perfect example to something on the line items that could be temporarily changed and scaled in some way that would not require us cutting any teachers. We could easily say, well, it wouldn't be an easy decision and it would affect Newton residents, but to say temporarily class size is going to go up by a half student per classroom. And that would be a way to balance the budget without having to eliminate teachers who have dedicated their lives to Newton Public Schools. Reasonable class size in Newton right now, 18 to 20 kids in kindergarten through second grade, and I believe it's 20 to 22, but current sitting school committee members would know the exact numbers, but I think we're looking pretty good.
Gail?
Current class sizes, I think Matthew has the numbers pretty much correctly, but the ideal class size varies depending on the age and in some cases even the class. It may be that an AP math class can handle, those kids could handle a larger class than something else, and I think it is an elastic question, issue.
In your own ward, if Wells Avenue were developed with residential units, or the Northlands property at Oak and Highland have dense housing built there, would you support a new school in your ward to service those families in the housing, and possibly even to help reunite Upper Falls Elementary School children under one roof? Let's start with you, Gail.
I need to have more information about that before I could say I would support it. If depends on where enrollment is at the time. It depends on how many students are in the current elementary and middle schools. But if we really are bringing in that many students, I think we need to be looking at the possibility of another school.
Matt?
If only we had those 22 schools still. The 16 schools is something I've talked to a lot of people about. I think it's an idea that would work. However, it would require a huge budget increase. So there would be an impact in not only staff, but also maintenance of the new school. And considering we're in a deficit right now, it's something that would have to be very thoughtfully done. And so before I would even consider it, I would really want to take a look at the long-term impact. The truth is with enrollment, and this was mentioned earlier, that we have really great forecasting that is in the enrollment report right now. We also have a student assignment working group that is balancing the new space in Zervis with removing some space in Countryside. That would be a possible solution versus a 16th school. So not a solution that maybe would never happen, but something that given our budget crisis, it would be something we'd have to really think about before pushing forward.
In the minuscule amount of time that we have left, what do you think is the school system's greatest weakness? Matt?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Greatest
Greatest weakness, I would say right now, for me, diversity. I think that we have this wonderful partnership with the METCO program, which I value. But when I have attended the Forge, which is the conversation on racial justice and the courageous conversations, and have partnered with families of color that are living in Newton, we still have a long way to go with how race is being dealt with and incidents of hate crime. And so I really want to dig deeper. As a gay family living in Newton, this is a top priority for me, and I think we can be much better in this area.
Gail?
I would agree that diversity is very important, and I think it's especially important among the teaching staff. I think if there's anything that we really don't excel at, it's a diverse population of teachers.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your participation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Katzoulis. I'm the director of debate at Boston College, and I'm glad that you're here to witness a lively debate on an important topic. In November 2012, many of you probably know that the voters of the city of Newton elected a 9-member charter commission to review the city's current charter, which has been adopted in 1972. Although the current charter has been amended many times, the Charter Commission was elected to do a comprehensive review. The Charter Commission's final proposal has a number of changes, and a new charter is being submitted to the electorate to be adopted or rejected on November 7th by the voters of the city. In this debate, you, the audience, and the voters of Newton will decide who wins the debate when you cast your ballot on November 7th. The proposition for today's debate is resolved. It is proposed that a Newton City charter be adopted. The debaters will go into the specific arguments for the charter, but just let me kind of highlight kind of the two most controversial kind of elements of the issue, at least according to my judgment from looking at the website from both sides. The two pivotal issues seem to be whether or not it's desirable to reduce the number of council people from 24 to 12, and whether term limits should be imposed on the council and the mayor. The debaters will go into detail on these issues and others. The format for today's debate is rather simple. There'll be 4 speeches called constructive speeches that'll be 5 minutes in length. After each constructive speech, there'll be a 3-minute cross-examination period where the other side will ask questions to the speaker. And the affirmative will begin the debate since they're advocating for change. So the debate will begin with the first affirmative speech of 5 minutes followed by a cross-ex, and then there'll be 3 other constructive speeches followed by a cross-examination period. Now, to introduce the debaters in today's debate, on the affirmative side, we have Ronna Kidwell, who's the vice chair of the Charter Commission, will be the first affirmative. The second affirmative will be Jeff Sachs, who's an attorney and yes supporter. On the negative side, the first negative speaker will be Mark Laredo. He's an at-large counselor from Ward 7 and a former chair of the Newton School Committee. The second negative speaker will be Jack Pryor, who's a 14-year resident of Newtonville, and he serves as the treasurer of the Newton Citizens for Local Representation, the ballot committee opposing adoption of the proposed charter. So to begin today's debate, We'll call to the podium the first affirmative speaker, Ronna Kidwell.
Hi, thank you all for coming, and hold on to your seats. I have to talk really fast because 5 minutes is just not enough time. So as you know, we'll soon be voting on whether to adopt a new city charter that would downsize Newton's City Council from 24 members to 12 and impose term limits on the offices of the City Council and the mayor. And the first natural question is why? Why have Newton residents been pushing for a smaller city council for the last 50 years? We've had the city council structure in place since it was first adopted in 1897. So what is the problem? Why the rush? And the problem is that city councils have evolved in the last 120 years. In our peer group of the 20 largest cities in Massachusetts, the average city council size is 10. And across the country, the average city council size is 6. And we have 24. So if you've ever sat on any kind of decision-making board, you feel the pain. Our current 24-member council is not serving us well. It's not effective, it's not responsive, accountable, or very democratic. It's not effective when it takes months to deliberate decisions that leave local businesses in limbo or to establish a much-needed dog park. It's not responsive when we spend a decade on zoning reform with little to show for it. Just look around at the teardowns and monster homes and know that we need a city council that can accomplish zoning reform. Our city council is not accountable. No one gets held accountable on a 24-member council. Most people can't name the 3 councilors from their ward, much less where any of the 24 stand on any issue or whether they show up to meetings prepared. A shorter ballot would allow voters to make more informed choices. We don't have a strong democracy when city council meetings on controversial topics go till midnight or later. That discourages citizen participation, a key element of democracy, and it particularly discriminates against certain segments like single parents or people who have to get up at 5 a.m. for work. They can't stay at City Hall until all hours. So enough about the size. Let's talk about the composition of the council proposed by the Charter Commission. Our city is economically and geographically diverse. So the Charter Commissioners all agreed that we have to have one counselor who lives in each ward. That was very clear. At the same time, Newton is compact. We're only 18 square miles. And for context, Boston is 90 square miles. And Boston, geographically speaking, is not a huge city. So on average, a ward in Newton is about 2 square miles. Our ward boundaries are arbitrary. They don't align with our village. Each village sits in 2 or 3 wards. The ward boundaries don't divide us into meaningful regions, and they change every 10 years with the census. So when a ward is 2 square miles, none of us lives our lives within one ward. We all care about traffic and public safety or conditions for local businesses in the wards near us. So the Charter Commission has proposed that the counselor who will live in each ward should be voted on by the whole city. So that means that the counselor from the ward where your home is answers to you. But so do the counselors from the wards where you walk your dog or send your kids to school or soccer practice or where you worship or where you shop. An unsafe crosswalk or a chronic traffic issue in any of those wards affects your daily life. So it would be good if the counselors from those wards would take your concerns into account. The proposed council also adds 4 seats for counselors who don't represent a ward. 54 of 56 cities in Massachusetts have some counselors elected this way. And this offers an entry point to the city council for someone who doesn't want to challenge the ward incumbent. Perhaps they feel they're doing a great job. And these seats are our research indicated these seats are always challenged in every election. So people holding these seats are held more accountable. The charter is a 30-page document, and I've only talked about the most major change. The only other one I have time to address is that our research indicated a steady decline in both contested elections and turnover of council seats over the last 30 years. So in my mind, healthy turnover would be about 33%. That's 2/3 institutional wisdom and 1/3 new ideas. Our turnover has declined to 15%. That's not a healthy mix. So term limits would address that. Our proposal was the result of a thorough, transparent process. Observers have called our process a model for elected bodies. We held 38 public meetings with public comment at every meeting, 7 public hearings, 6 panel discussions, etc. So we unanimously agreed on the new charter, and we offer it to voters in good faith as 9 people who are deeply committed to making Newton stronger. Thank you so much.
Hi. So Ron and I have been debating this for several months, so we know we have pretty much the scripted, I would think. People will watch Village 14. So I guess I would just ask 3 questions from a data point of view, which you would probably anticipate. So is it true that most cities in Massachusetts have 6 or more ward-elected councilors? The charter proposes none. Most cities have 4 or less at-large councilors. The charter proposes 12. Of all the communities in Massachusetts, is it true that only 10 have all at-large elections, which would make us the 11th? And I guess if you look at turnover, is it true that with 16-year term limits, it's only going to drive at most 13.5% turnover, additional turnover, if you have that long of a life cycle for a councilor, particularly if people stay until they're finished?
So, thank you. And this format is a challenge. I had a hard time processing all that information. Let me just say that we looked at a peer group of we looked at all 56 cities well, there were only 55 at the time. Now Framingham has become a city. We looked at all 55 cities in Massachusetts, and we looked at a peer group of the 20 biggest, because Newton falls right in the middle of that peer group of the 20 biggest cities. So 18% of cities in Massachusetts have city councils that are elected all at large, and 30% of our peer group of the 20 largest cities have city councils that are elected all at large. So having this format would not make us an outlier. It would make us part of a 30% minority. We looked at all these things in the context of what we thought was best for Newton. We are a geographically compact city, and we thought that it was really important that there was extreme benefit to having all councilors accountable to all voters.
Thank you. I guess to the question of accountability, one of our flaws today is that we have 2 at-large seats. We're picking 2 out of 3. When we have 4 seats that are at-large without residency, they're not going to be running head-to-head. How, if I don't like the views of one of those councilors, can I hold them accountable? I can run, I can vote for 3 or 4 people, but it's not head-to-head. It doesn't really clarify stances. How will we clarify the stances of the people on that slate, which will likely be a slate?
Well, today we have 16 councilors that you can't hold accountable in head-to-head matchups. So if you don't like non-head-to-head matchups, this is an improvement. A benefit of this group of 4 is that you would be able to have a minority view expressed. If a bunch of voters across the city decide they want to band together and bullet vote one of those people, you can get a minority opinion on the council that you might not otherwise get in all head-to-head matchups. So that is a benefit to this form. That is something we have no experience with in Newton today.
Thank you. I guess in terms of the length of city council meetings and committee meetings, isn't most of the time driven by actual voter participation, resident participation, public comment from individual councilors? I've seen, certainly in land use, it seems like the majority of time is public comment from the citizens and relatively limited discussion from on the floor itself.
Well, I think land use may be a little different in committee hearings, but in our research in the Charter Commission, we found that councilors in other cities spend considerably less time doing the job because they have shorter committee meetings and considerably shorter meetings with the whole group, and the committees meet much less frequently. They can do work in the committee of the whole, which is the whole group, that we can't really effectively do very often with a group of 24.
Thank you. Looks like we have to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name's Mark Laredo. I'm a city councilor from Ward 7. I run at large, and I'm the former chair of the school committee. I've lived in Newton with my family most of my life. I think we face a very stark and a very clear choice on November 7th on this charter question. And the question is this: do we replace a system that has equal representation spread out throughout the city, each part of the city getting a voice? Do we replace that with one that is inherently unequal, limits accountability, is more likely to lead to special interests dominating our city government, and makes it harder to run for office? To me, the answer is no, and that's why I'm voting against the charter, and I hope you do so as well. So let's talk about these 3 key points: diversity of opinion and equality. Right now in the City Council, you get a variety of opinion, very important factor. We have an array of voices that are heard, and we build over time consensus outcomes because we don't agree on every issue. Witness leaf blowers. Perfect example. I don't even want to take a survey in this room, for, against, yes or no, but what do we do as a city council with diverse voices that heard from all parts of the city? We came up with a creative solution that probably didn't please anybody perfectly, but actually works out really well. And that's what you have when you have diversity of opinion and you have equal representation. And we have area councils. We have 4 area councils here right now. Why do we have area councils? The same reason we have ward councilors. We want people from individual areas of the city to be heard. I presume you all like the ward councils. They function well. They're an important voice. And ward councilors provide exactly that same voice and a seat at the table. Why change that? Second, if you run from a ward, you're directly accountable to the people there. If you run at large, but you're from a ward, you have to still be accountable. But if you can run at large and 5 people out of the 12 could be from one small segment of the city, not only is that inherently unequal, but those folks aren't accountable in the same way that a ward councilor is accountable or I'm accountable. Third, anti-democratic. You know, when you run from, I've run for office now at large for a while, and it's hard. It takes money, it takes time, it takes political networks. So if you want to run at large in this city, it's pretty darn hard to do it. But that's not true if you're a ward councilor. If you're a ward councilor, you literally can go and knock on doors. You can effectively, through grassroots communication, get your voice out there. So why do we want to create a system that makes it harder, in this day and age, harder and more expensive to run for public office? Finally, I think we need to be honest here. We need to be honest about the fact that this yes vote is not about reducing the size of the city council. If the Charter Commission really had wanted to reduce the size of the city council, it could have done so very easily with exactly the plan that myself and 13 of my colleagues have put forth. And that is 8 ward councilors, 8 councilors at large with a residency requirement. Simple, isn't it? Charter Commission didn't want that. Nor did they want an alternative plan that frankly would have been just about as good. 8 at large, 1 from each ward, and 4 district councilors, again, elected throughout the city. Why would that have been better? Because it would have kept people accountable. It still would have allowed you to run for office. It would have been equal representation. So what do we get instead? We get a system that, frankly, is going to make it a heck of a lot easier for special interests in this city to influence the city council. And I think that's bad. I think that's bad government, I think that's bad policy, and I think that's a bad way to run the city. You know, we are a great city. We are run well. And sometimes things take time, but we need to be critically important that all voices not only are heard, but have a seat at the table. And this charter proposal takes that seat away. And for those reasons, I'm voting no on November 7, and I hope you'll join me in doing so. Thank you.
So you say we need to be honest. Thank you. I think we need to be honest. So you talk about how it's easier to run for a ward seat. But you know, I'm sure you've read that we've done the research and saw that at-large seats are contested more than twice as often as ward seats, which tells me it's not necessarily easier to get a ward seat or people would run for them more often. You said that it costs a lot of money to run citywide. When you know that campaign finance data shows that it actually costs about the same in a contested election to run citywide. This data is all publicly available. Anyone can look it up. It doesn't cost more to run for a ward seat on a contested race than it does for an at-large seat. And I think you're also aware that about half the feedback that we got as a charter commission over 18 months from all these public hearings and public comments from people was from people who wanted half the counselors accountable, wanted all counselors accountable to all voters. Another way of saying that is no one who answers only to the ward. So this tells me that voters don't really want this council of 16. We didn't get feedback to support that. We won't make it easier for people to run for office with maintaining ward seats. And I just want to know why you keep promoting these ideas that we all know actually aren't true.
Well, I beg to differ. Maybe the reason someone's not running for the Ward 5 seat against John Rice is because John Rice does a great job. He's an incredibly effective ward counselor. When I campaign in my Ward 7 and I'm knocking on doors and I say, I'm Mark Laredo, I'm one of your counselors, and please vote no, they say, Lyle Baker, he's our city councilor, because Lyle is the person they go to with the myriad of problems that they have. And I think that's true throughout the city. Those are the people who go to. As far as running citywide, Rana, I just got to tell you, let's use some common sense here, okay? Common sense, and it doesn't require statistics or detailed analysis. Common sense. What's easier and cheaper, folks? To walk a 2-mile, because I think you use a 2-mile radius of a ward, and go out and knock on doors and send out some emails and send out a small mailing, or do it citywide? You can't possibly, unless you're my colleague Jake Auchincloss and you had a lot of time in your hand, as a city councilor, go citywide. I can't do that. I have a day job. But if a ward person wants to run, they do it. And you know what? There are 2 people running right now who are doing exactly that. Brenda Noel in Ward 6 is running a spirited campaign against Dick Blazer, and she's out there doing it on the ground. There's a woman in Ward 4, Allison Sharma, who's running a write-in campaign. You can't run a write-in campaign citywide. And when people are unhappy with their ward counselor, they run against him. That's what Dick Blazer did when he walked his ward and won, and that's what Steve Linsky did when he walked his ward and won.
So thank you. You also talked about how this proposal would give unequal representation.
I think we're done. Sorry. I'm happy to keep going if
Never
you
go
are.
up against a lawyer who loves to talk.
I do love to talk, so I forgive me.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sachs. Not totally clear on the format, but I'm ready to go. So I'm speaking not from a role as a commissioner or as a counselor. I'm speaking from my experience as a member of several of Newton's volunteer boards and someone who's tried to participate in debates around the city. I've concluded the overwhelming priority to improve our city's governance is to have a smaller board. I've reached this conclusion for several reasons. We need to build a vision for the future of Newton, recognizing what is unique about our villages and about our city. More voices do not necessarily make better decisions. A smaller city council can lead to more meaningful dialogue. A smaller city council is a more accountable body. I try to pay attention to issues, but I find it impossible to track the views of so many councilors. We are the largest municipal legislative body in the Commonwealth. I know that I'm not the only one who has trouble staying up past 11 on weeknights when we need to get up in the morning. I've left many hearings, and that land use may be an exception to that, but the public hearings, listening to the councilors, the debates go on for hours longer, and that's not how to have an accountable and accessible board. I served on Newton's Community Preservation Committee and had to leave that group because of term limits. The new charter provides for a very important change by creating term limits for both the mayor and the councilors. These generous 16-year term limits for the council will assure institutional knowledge is preserved, but that the council will be open to new members and new ideas. My ward council has served for 32 years. That is too long. The at-large election of all councilors will preserve both local representation through the 8 local councilors, just as our current school committee is currently constituted, and because they run at large, they must also look at the city as a whole. We just heard a little discussion about how expensive it is to run citywide. 2/3 of the councilors do that now. In my experience, these councilors are not a wealthier set of representatives. If they're civically engaged, they're able to reach out to their networks and raise money from their neighbors and run their races. I believe that very few, if any, of our council races have been self-funded by wealthy councilors. To me, it is very telling that our current mayor, Seti Warren, and both mayoral candidates, Scott Lennon and Ruth Ann Fuller, support the new charter. Scott Lennon served as both a ward and an at-large councilor, and has said his constituent service in his ward was always a central part of his work in either role, whether as a ward councilor or at large. Right now, our City Hall staff must be responsive to 24 councilors in their efforts to assist the councilor in doing its job, often leading to overlapping and duplicative demands in their time. The smaller council will save taxpayers money with 12 versus 24 getting salaries and health care for life. I believe an important reason that the mayoral candidates support the new charter is that their primary task is to work with all sectors of the city in each village to create a common vision for our city as a whole. We need to create a common sense of how to address citywide issues and to work to preserve what is best about Newton while meeting our city's pressing needs. The new charter will give our mayor and our citizens a better council to work with to achieve these goals. Newton has been reacting to the forces of change in the economy which are shaping our city. We need to be proactive and come together to address better roads, to create affordable housing and senior housing, to address traffic congestion and to have meaningful zoning reform, and to end the move to tear downs and McMansions, and to make Newton the sustainable, environmentally friendly city we want it to be. The 12-member council proposal will be a better way to achieve these goals. Thank you.
So I just have to start off by saying I've known Jeff for a number of years, and he's done really amazing work in the city on a variety of commissions, and especially in the area of some of the affordable housing work you've done. So it's really a pleasure to share the podium with him. And it shows, I think, that we can agree sometimes to disagree, but we respect, hopefully, what everyone else does. So let me, if I could, just lay out a couple of things for you, Jeff. You know, I've probably never met a mayor who wouldn't like a smaller city council. And I gotta say, if I was a mayor, I would like a smaller city council. I might like no city council, actually. Why? Because it's all about checks and balances. So wouldn't you agree with me that it's really important for the city council to serve as a check on the mayor? Would you agree with me on that?
Well, all I'm saying, in my experience, is that listening to 24, we don't get a better result than I think many, many cities, as Ron has said and studied, have smaller councils that are just as effective in being that check. And I think we can be more effective with a smaller group of voices.
Let me give you an example of why I think we do well with diverse representation on the city council, which we're going to lose if this. The accessory apartment ordinance, okay? For those of you not familiar with it, we passed that almost overwhelmingly in the city council. It took a long time to get there, but it took time to get there because we need to listen to all the people very carefully, and we did it. A better example, and I used that a little while ago, is leaf blowers. I read in the tab recently that someone said, well, if only the city council could be more efficient, leaf blower ordinance would have been approved quickly. Well, you know, when I hear the words be more efficient, I usually hear that someone really wants it to be more efficient their way. And I think we need to work very hard to do that.
I think that to get to consensus, I don't see how the larger council gives us the more diversity. We have voices from all over the city, and I think to be able to sit around in smaller groups, the same issues come up, the same public input happens, and we are able to get to the issues focused, and move on in a more efficient format.
I served in a school committee. School committee is like a board of directors. I see a few of my former colleagues sitting in the audience. I know they don't agree with me on this, but that's okay. They didn't agree with me on a lot of things when I served on the school committee, and they acknowledged that. But quite seriously, the school committee functions really differently. It's a board of directors. It oversees a single entity. And that's not what a city council is supposed to do.
I've been in front of the cities, I've been in front of the committees, I've been in front of the council, and, to get many, okay.
I think we're being told to stop.
All I want to say is that you can get all the input in the same fashion with a small group of voices.
And I guess we'll have to differ on that. Thanks.
Thank you. So my first question to the organizers is, can I cede my 5 minutes to Mark? Thank you. So my name is Jack Pryor. I'm a 14-year resident of Newtonville. I'm a chemical engineer by trade in my day job, so I kind of prefer data to debate and spreadsheets to speaking. But I'll do my best to represent the group seeking a no vote on November 7th. I think there's three key reasons to vote no, and I think Mark covered some of these things, but I'll recover them. Loss of local representation, loss of balance, and loss of access to office. So first, local representation. The city charter, in the current city charter, defines a role. Ward councilor, John Rice is one. It's a well-defined role, just like the president and the mayor, or the president of the council and the mayor. That position is eliminated. That position is elected by about 11,000 residents, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 voters, depending on the turmoil of the election, represents the people in that ward. That is being eliminated. It's concerning to me that the Yes campaign leads their brochures stating that ward representation is being retained. It is not. It is being eliminated. It retains residency, but residency is not representation. This isn't rocket science. This is schoolhouse rock. You can find it on YouTube, right? This is how legislatures work. For a person in a ward, or a resident in a ward selected by the other 7/8 of the city, is not that ward's representative. Now, of course, people like Mark take a stronger interest in their ward and the projects in their ward, and they probably interact a little bit more with their constituents in that ward. But they're elected citywide, and their focus, even though it's strong, is diluted across there. So I think that's important. And the second question is balance. Right now we have 3 residents per ward, 1 elected locally, 2 at large, spread evenly across the city. The proposal goes to 1 resident per ward, elected by the whole city, 7/8 being elected from people elsewhere, and 4 who can live anywhere. So if you believe that residency is representation, and you can't have it both ways. If residency is representation, at least 4 wards will go to 1 representative. That's at best. It could be 7 will go to 1 representative and 5 will go to 1 more powerful ward. Now, the League of Women Voters argues that won't happen, that those 4 at-large positions will not concentrate in a ward. Instead, they will concentrate around some special interest. And you can imagine what it might be, given the debate of the day. And we won't have real clarity on what their positions are, because they won't be running head-to-head. And this is a real lost opportunity in the council. They could have set these positions in as head-to-head races, and at least you'd have clarity. So again, we're losing ward representation. If you believe residency is representation, we're losing balance. And there's 2 types of balance. There's balance between locally elected ward councilors and citywide focus, and then balance geographically. I think ward councilors are a different type of councilor on average. Of course, you have a lot of variety in councilors, but on average, they're a little more in tune with local neighborhoods, and they're not fighting just for their local neighborhood. They're looking at the city with a neighborhood perspective, and we need to keep that balance. Finally, access to office. A ward council, again, to the size of the city, 2 square miles, someone can run in the ward for free. They can knock on doors over the course of several months in the evening and meet voters face-to-face, discuss with voters, get that input. I'm helping to run a citywide campaign now. I know what it's about. It's yard signs, it's flyers in the mail, it's things like this. It's not as much direct input that we need on the council. And it's not a matter of listening. The Charter Commission listened very well. They did a great job over time gathering input. But there's a difference between hearing input and then viscerally representing it with your colleagues. And I think we have that diversity of opinion on the board today. So I think those are the things. So I think, again, to the races today, there's a lot of democracy going on in Newton. It's alive and well. But where are the interesting races? Where are the unpredictable races? I'd say it's the Ward 4 and Ward 6 council races. That's where the battle's being fought face-to-face with voters. And I don't need to vote for everyone in the city. I trust my neighbors in other wards, having looked at candidates closely, to elect the right people for them as well as for the whole city. And so I disagree with this premise of having to vote for all people. We're looking at having to vote for 12 people. It's really just a small reduction from the 17 we vote for now. If you believe in simpler ballots, this isn't the way to do it. So finally, I've got a little bit of time left just in terms of data. I mentioned it earlier. This is not a best practice proposal. It's not in the model city charter. No other city in Massachusetts has it. Maybe no other city in the country. I do a lot of Googling. There's 3,000 cities. I'll have to check. I haven't found it yet. It's most similar only to Everett. Again, as I mentioned in the cross earlier, only 10 cities have all-at-large elections. One of them is Lowell. Lowell is 49% minority. Their school student body is 70% minority. Their city council is 100% white. It's concentrated in the richer part of the city, and they're being sued for it. Now, we're not Lowell. We don't have the racial diversity that Lowell has, but there is significant socioeconomic diversity in this city. I'm learning it just involved in the campaign. To drive the perimeter of this city is probably an hour and a half to go around, and help put signs in yards. And the yards in this city are very different. The villages are very different. We need that represented on the council. So there's a lot of data here, a lot of things to discuss. Our website is newtondemocracy.org. Come there, learn the issues, and make an informed choice. Important thing to know, it's not about charter schools. Thank you.
So, thank you. So just to continue on that point, for many years, I didn't know who my ward alderman was and who was elected at large. Is my at large? I know Lyle Baker now is my ward alderman, but 8 out of 10 residents surveyed didn't know who the ward councilor was or named the wrong person. So clearly that function, and I think Mark would agree that his constituent service is very intense in our ward, as well as his service around the city. 2/3 of the councilors in the entire school committee are elected at large, and they continue to represent the wards in the council. You talk about losing representation of the villages, yet our wards do not align with the villages. Once a community moves beyond direct town meeting to run its affairs, we're going to have some kind of representative government. The question is how best to constitute that representation. And Scott Lennon, as I said earlier, was another example who served in both roles and really said they're the same. So how do you say we're giving up local representation when we shift to a smaller board with 8 members, elected 1 from each of the wards?
All right, so I know how Ronna felt with the multi-part questions. Sorry, Ronna. But I think they're good questions. So first, knowing your counselor. If you don't know your counselor, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I see my primary care physician twice a year. When that happens, that's a good thing. I see the nurse the other times, right? If you're having a trouble with the city, that's when you're going to tend to meet your city councilor. I met our city councilor, Steve Linsky, before Emily Norton, when our streets suddenly narrowed due to on-street parking by students being pushed away from Newton North. He walked us through the process, brought us to City Hall, walked us through the petition, and got those signs in place. That addressed a serious safety issue for us, and I was pleased with it. And then I didn't need to know. I really don't want to know too much about the city council. I want it to work. So that's the first thing. In terms of representation, I think in an arm wrestle between Mark and Lyle, I'm guessing Lyle might take it in Ward 7, but you could judge better than me. What was the other question? Scott Lennon. Scott Lennon's a mayoral candidate here. He got his start as a ward councilor. He ran and lost once, and then he won the second time. I'm not sure he would be here on the podium if he didn't have that route into government. Maybe he would have, he's a pretty activist guy, maybe he would have gone on at large eventually, but he got on first as a ward councilor, and it's in his genes, right? That's sort of how he began his practice, and he didn't shift that much. What was the last question? There was something about alignment? Alignment of wards and villages. Yes, of course, we have 13 villages and 8 wards. That's actually a good thing. It's not a question of village direct representation. You have a Newtonville rep or a Newton Highlands rep. It's about scale. It's about having someone concerned with that 2 square miles and working with their adjacent ward councilors to keep things at a local level working correctly. When I go around the city, I'm pleased that I see projects that have been implemented well. I don't, just because I occasionally visit them, I don't need to vote for the people in those areas. I want the people in those areas keeping the city excellent.
So the city council under the proposed charter will be more effective, responsive, and accountable. It'll bring us a modernized, stronger leadership structure that will be able to tackle many of the problems that haven't been addressed under our current structure, such as zoning reform, revitalization of our struggling village centers, improving bike and pedestrian safety, repairing our infrastructure like crumbling streets and sidewalks, and increased affordable housing to ease our housing crisis. With all 12 councilors accountable to you, the voter, you can be sure that you'll have a voice in issues that affect you. And with term limits, we can be guaranteed that more choices at the ballot and more fresh ideas will balance institutional wisdom. So the 9 members of the Charter Commission have lived here for a cumulative 315 years, and we have deep roots in community service to Newton. We volunteered countless hours for this task for no other reward than to live in a better city. Newton has had 16 counselors elected at large for years. Are they all wealthy and self-funded? There's never been a class distinction between at-large and ward counselors in Newton, and there isn't in reality a difference in the cost of a contested election for a ward versus an at-large seat. In fact, 3 candidates for ward seats in this election have raised more than $13,000. And the biggest asset to running for office in Newton is a network of people that you have gathered through years of community activism. So there was a comment made that the real purpose of this proposal is not to downsize the city council, but to somehow sell out to special interests. So let me just remind you about my fellow charter commissioners and our 315 years of activism in Newton. We did a tally and we found that there are 59 local organizations where we have had significant impact through community volunteerism. The list includes the PTOs or school councils at 11 different schools, Green Newton, Historic Newton, the Boys and Girls Club, the Y. The list goes on. But this is a group that wants to sell Newton out to special interests. I don't see it that way. I think we've really just been pushing for what we think is best in Newton. Regarding Jack's comments about the importance of the ward council, remember that wards are made up of 11,000 residents. There's never an official position of the ward on any issue. People within the ward disagree on any major issue, and a counselor from a ward can't simply stand up for what the ward wants. The leadership challenge is far more complex. It involves hearing all sides, ferreting out all the possibilities, attempting to lead the all sides to a unifying solution, and often an important viewpoint comes from close-by neighbors who don't happen to live in that exact ward. And finally, the discussion of how one ward could have 5 representatives, which is ironic because the no side also argues that people elected at large can't actually represent a ward. So first you have to understand that these councilors are not elected to represent a ward. We're one of only 2 cities in Massachusetts that doesn't have this configuration, so I understand that people can be confused about this here in Newton. But we have this issue of the ability to concentrate today. We have corridors of Newton where 3 and 4 wards meet in one neighborhood, making it possible to have either 9 or 12 people come from one general neighborhood. The intersection of Comm Ave and Washington Street, 3 wards come together. West of City Hall, we have 4 wards to come together. The same thing at the intersection of Church and Center. We have that risk today, and it never actually happens. It's just not a risk that is likely to happen with 4 at-large counselors. So again, I hope you'll vote yes for a new charter that will be more effective, responsive, and accountable. Our last charter commission was 46 years ago. Our city council has tried and failed 12 times to downsize itself via home rule petition. That's just not a viable path for this kind of change. This is our one chance for change, so join me in voting yes on November 7th.
So if you listen to what Rana just said, you'd think as a city we're in terrible shape. It's the city council that just can't get anything done, and this city's crumbling. Well, that's not the Newton I know. The Newton I know has a AAA bond rating that's sound, is voted consistently one of the best cities in the country, and our current mayor and both our mayoral candidates talk about what a wonderful place we are and how well we do. So our city council must actually be doing something right. But what this charter and what all charters are about is values. And we're going to leave you with 4 values that I ask that you think about as you walk out of here today. And I hope when you think of those values, you vote no. Equal representation, limiting special interests, diversity of opinion, and democracy. We've explained why the charter proposal is inherently unequal. It doesn't require advanced degrees to understand that having people from the ward and at large who are scattered throughout the city is a very, very different system than one which could have 5 people from one small section of the city. And I don't know how you call that equal. It just isn't. Second, special interests. I don't think anybody really likes special interests. And we've frankly seen the harm that the special interests can do at the national level. And under our current system, it's actually pretty darn hard for special interests to drive any particular issue. It's hard to run a slate for the city council when your council members are elected from the ward and at large and they're spread out all over the city. But with the proposed charter change, it's not hard to envision a slate of candidates sponsored by the well-heeled and particular special interests trying to, in some ways, control the city council. We do not need to create a system that has that potential. Special interests aren't the way to go. You know, we talk diversity of opinion. We talk a lot in our city about diversity of opinion and respect for differences. Yet the proposed charter goes in exactly the opposite direction. It eliminates ward councilors entirely, something that the Charter Commission proponents have been very skillfully trying to stay away from. No more ward councilors. That's clear. Now, I will tell you, I am someone who has consistently voted in favor of development in this city. I've supported Austin Street and Washington Place as chair of the Land Use Committee. I voted in favor of Riverside. We just voted in favor of the Sunrise development in Newton Corner. And I've been a strong supporter of each and every one of our school projects, from the high school when I was in the school committee to the 3 elementary schools that we're just working on. But I also recognize the importance of diversity of opinion. And our projects are better, much better, because we get that diversity of opinion. Because we have a ward councilor who talks about what the immediate neighbors think, we get better projects. Austin Street, better project. Washington Place, better project. Sunrise, better project. And we shouldn't shut those voices out. We should have them have a seat at the table. And I go back to what I said before. Ward 5 has an incredibly effective ward councilor who speaks for the interests of his ward while looking out for the needs of the city as a whole. And I don't want to lose the voice of someone like John Rice on our city council. Nor do we eliminate diversity by making our council more efficient. As I said a moment ago, when people think something needs to get done more efficiently, what they often mean is do it my way. And I'm the first to admit it. I'd love things to be done my way most, if not all of the time. But in fact, on controversial issues, do you know where we spend most of our time? Do you know where I spend my time as a city councilor? It's listening to you. That's my job. That diversity is critically important, and we're going to lose it. Finally, why would we make it harder to run for public office? That's pretty darn anti-democratic, but that's exactly what the Charter Commission proposes. So take this home with you, please. Preserve equal representation. Limit special interests. Promote diversity of opinion, and promote democracy. And please vote no on November 7th. Thank you.
Well, I think we heard a lively debate. You should all vote on November 7th and realize that when you vote yes, you vote for the entire charter. You can't vote for like part of it. And if you vote no, you vote against the whole charter. It's kind of like an up or down vote. You should kind of realize that when you vote. It's like all or nothing. So thank you for attending. It was a good debate. Congratulations.